Good evening. My name is Aurelio Curvera. I'm the Director of Multicultural Programs for the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and I want to welcome you to Iowa State University and to this occasion. First of all, I have to remind of our sponsors. We have the Latino Studies Programs, the College of Design, the Ag Multicultural Programs Office, the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, Department of Sociology, Latinoamericanos, and the Committee on Lectures, which is funded by the government of the student body. So thanks to them. Today we have the opportunity to have Mr. Luis Argueta. Luis Argueta is a filmmaker who has also worked as a commercial director, lecturer, and teacher in the United States, Europe, and throughout the Americas. Born and raised in Guatemala, Argueta is a U.S. citizen and has been a resident of New York since 1977. He holds a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering and a master's degree in Romance languages from the University of Michigan, where he also did postgraduate work in cinema. He has directed and produced short films, The Squirrel, Perdón del Gato Rabón, and Guatemalan Christmas, a 16-minute featurette, The Tricycle documentaries, The Cost of Cotton, Guatemala 9/11/03, The Human Face of a Civic Celebration, and The Literary Angel, and two feature films, The Silence of Neto and Collect Coal. Argueta has lectured extensively at universities and colleges across the country and at international conferences. Argueta has received several international awards. His film, The Silence of Neto, is the only Guatemala film ever to have reached the Academy Awards competition, and he is the only Guatemalan director to have received a CLIO award. In April 2009, the British newspaper, The Guardian, listed Mr. Argueta as one of the Guatemala's national living icons, alongside Nobel Prize laureate Rigoberta Menchú and singer-songwriter Ricardo Arjona. Presently, Argueta runs his production company, Maya Media Group, and is directing and producing Abuse, the Postville Raid, a documentary about the largest, most expensive, and most brutal immigration customs enforcement raids in the history of the United States. And before we welcome him, I want to remind you that if you are in a class, you need to sign out there, and please turn off your cell phones, okay? And let's receive Mr. Argueta with a clap of applause, okay?
Good evening. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be at Iowa State, and thank you to everybody who made it possible and to all of you for coming tonight. This is my 29th trip to Iowa in 26 months, and I'm very happy to be here. What we're going to do tonight is I will give you a very brief introduction about how I got to this point, how I got interested in the story, and what it has meant for me. Then we will screen 6 segments of the film: the beginning, some parts in the middle, and the end. We will stop at the end of each section, and then at the end we will have questions and answers. Some of you were in Postville on May 12, 2008. I see faces here that I've come to people that I've come to really love and respect and admire. And I, like many people, was too busy with my life, so that on May 13th, when I heard about the raid on National Public Radio, which I do every morning since I was a kid, all I do is listen to radio, I didn't pay much attention. I heard about Postville, didn't know where that was. It stuck in the back of my mind, and I made a note. I was working on a story about an undocumented man who gets deported. And originally, he was to be a farm worker from California. My note was, make him a meatpacking plant worker from Iowa. I went about my life. 2 months later, on July 11th, the New York Times had an article on the front page by Julia Preston about Eric Kamay Frejas. Eric Kamay Frejas, as a lot of you probably know, was a federal interpreter who went to National Cattle Congress in Waterloo to interpret during the proceedings that followed the raid. How many of you have read Eric Kamay's essay? Okay, especially to the young people. Shame on you. You better read it. You owe it to yourselves. If you think that you live in a democracy, if you think that it's worth fighting for what this country stands for, read that essay. It's 14 pages. I guarantee it will open your eyes. It will be worth your time. Eric Camyd, C-A-M-Y-D. You will Google and find the essay. It's worth it. It's really important. In this essay, Mr. Camyd tells what he saw, what he heard, and then proceeds to analyze the forces behind what he saw and what he heard, which is the forces behind immigration. I wrote to everybody I knew, and I said, what I told you, read this essay. It's really important. I wrote to Mr. Camyd and asked for his permission to translate it to Spanish, and I wrote to a publisher saying, if we get the rights, will you publish it? Everybody said yes. And then I made one more call, and that was to St. Bridget's Church in Postville. And I said, I want to come and do some interviews because I like to do something about the story. And I said, by the way, I'm doing this on my dime, so can you find me a place to stay? Everybody said yes. So I went to Postville on July 23rd, and my plan was to be there 4 days and then go back to New York after having interviewed maybe 5 people, 6 people, and do 2-3 minute portraits of undocumented workers, which I had been doing for the past year. Well, on Monday, after being there 4 days, Vivian Rivas, my partner, and I were driving to the airport in Minneapolis, and I said, Vivian, I can't go back. I left her at the airport, and I went back to Postville, stayed a week, and then came back 28 more times, with this 29. On one of those trips, I accompanied 5 families that were leaving to go to Guatemala. And that was the first of 10 trips to Guatemala to see where the people had come from. And I became very fortunate to get the trust from the people so that I would take pictures to their families in Guatemala. Their families in Guatemala would say either videos or pictures or medicines or letters. And this was quite a privilege. So now we're going to see some of what I recorded during those 28 trips to Iowa and 10 to Guatemala. It was a total of 400 hours of material, and for the past year and a half we've been editing what now is a 96-minute feature documentary. Tonight we will see about 50 minutes in 6 sections. Okay? So the first one is the beginning of the film. Lights.
Thanks for joining me this morning for Roots in Americana Music on member-supported KPDL 89.1 Postville, Community Radio for the four-county area.
As I went walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. Listen, the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
Atlantic 17, be advised if you have any shots fired calls come out in the area fire related to our incident.
Around 10 o'clock this morning, immigration agents surrounded the agri-processors plant in Postville. It's the largest kosher meat packing plant in the country. At least 300 workers remain in federal custody tonight.
Walked into his office, 6 guys with guns, FBI men, and they said, you have to come with us.
We got into the ambulance and we drove up to Agra. All of a sudden I see lines and rows of Hispanic workers on their knees like dogs, and they were just chained. And I'd never seen anything like that before.
ICE has been in contact with the Iowa Department of Human Services. We've also talked to the mayor and the superintendent here to alert them of what's happening today and to get the correct information to them.
And at 10 o'clock, we received a fax. It doesn't really say exactly what's going to happen. It says, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, Office of the Special Agent in charge of St. Paul, Minnesota, may be in need of your office's support on May 12, 2008, based upon our plan to effect the criminal and administrative arrest of numerous foreign nationals within your jurisdiction. That was very confusing to me, exactly what that meant.
Okay, lights. The workers that were arrested that day were taken in buses to the National Cattle Congress in a very Machiavellian and ironic twist. The workers that were working in an assembly line processing cattle now became the human beings being processed in the legal assembly line that was set up at the National Cattle Congress. There, they were offered a proposition that they couldn't refuse. And it was either you pled guilty to using fake documents and accept 5 months in jail, followed by deportation, or face a trial for aggravated identity theft, which, as of 9/11 of 2001, carries a minimum sentence of 2 years. So, because these were criminal charges, and that's very important, they were charged criminally. They were picked up because they had no immigration status, but they were charged criminally. And if you are charged criminally and you cannot afford the lawyer, what happens? Does anybody know the rights? If you're picked up and you have no money to pay for a lawyer, what do? Huh? The court will appoint a lawyer. So that's what happened. The government gave them lawyers. Let's see what happened there. Lights. Lights. So, while this was happening in Waterloo, back in Postville, women were asked, and men too, if they had underage children at home that depended on them. If the answer was yes, they were separated and put in a different bus. And there they were questioned another time. And by the end of the day, the mothers and a father and two fathers were released. It was a total of about 48. And they were released with an ankle monitoring device that prevented them from working and prevented them from leaving the state, but allowed them to go and take care of their children. The rest of the people were sent to Waterloo. There were two women that, in spite of having children underage at home, said they didn't have any kids. And they said that because they were afraid. So let's see the story of Consuelo and Mercedes, the two mothers that said they had no kids. Okay, I think this is very important. The Supreme Court doesn't usually reach unanimous decisions. And what this means is that the statute that was used to pressure the workers to plead guilty is today not usable in these cases. And at the time, the government knew it. There was a court in Iowa that had challenged, and because this court said you shouldn't be using this statute against undocumented workers who have either fake Social Security numbers or somebody else's. There were two other courts that had said, yes, you can use it. After Postville, two more courts said, no, you can't, and one more court said, yes, you can. So it was 3-3. That's why it went to the Supreme Court, and that's how the decision came, unanimous. Okay, so as I said, some of the women were sent back to Postville to care for their children. To care for their children. And this is a very important operational word. Think about, it's very humane not to be sent to jail. Instead, you are sent home with an ankle bracelet so you can care for your kids. But let's see what happens. So people who went to jail for 5 months were then sent home. They were deported. And they had what's called a 10-year ban. For 10 years, they're not allowed to even try to come back to the country. They're convicted felons. So even after 10 years, if a convicted felon applies for a U.S. visa, most likely they won't get it. So this is pretty much banned for life. So what happened to them during their deportation, what happened to them once they got there, and what is behind the immigration that takes place. That's what this next to the last segment will show us. 4,000 to 10,000 people crossing a day. We're not there. Things have changed a little bit, but there's still a lot of people coming. And something that happened in places like Arizona and San Diego was that a lot of our tax money was spent building a fence. So people had to go and cross in other parts that are a lot more inhospitable and more dangerous. That's why in Pima County, Arizona, in the summer, they have to rent additional refrigerated trucks so that they can put the bodies of the people that they find in the desert dead from dehydration. So building this fence is one of the very irrational acts that we have done as a nation. The story of Postville is very complex, and we cannot tell everything, but there's one aspect that we must touch, and that is the other side, the employers that made this possible, as Dr. Bloom says. So now we're going to see the one of the attraction factors that brings immigrants, and then we will go and have the conclusions of the film and the ending. So here is the last segment, and then we can have some questions. Okay, I would like to recognize a couple people who are here, and I see Jeff and Mary. They are in the film, but they also are some of the heroes that our friend talked about. And Violeta Alemán, who you saw and heard on the film. And Luz, where did Luz go? Where's Luz? Luz went to the bathroom. Okay, so there's a microphone around, so let's have questions.
I want to thank you for this fine film. Two things. We have a granddaughter who has a husband who was undocumented from Mexico, picked up for a bad taillight one day as he was going to work. And to make a long story short, $10,000 and several years later, he does have a visa and is back here. And it was mainly because he did have a little child, and that somehow warmed their hearts. But that thoroughly convinced me that Homeland Security is a euphemism for fascism in the United States. Also, the day of the raid, I remember I was congresspersons rushing to the microphones to say how great it was that Homeland Security was protecting us from all those identity thefts. The idea being that they had all stolen dead grandma's Social Security number and were corrupting the world, when obviously you and I can buy a Social Security card for about $250 in Des Moines today. And the third item, as you look at your ballots to vote in November, there is not one profile of courage person on any of the ballots. They all chickened out and refused to look at the gross injustice that has been happening for decades here. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to read you something that was published in the New York Times today, talking about Homeland Security. Last year's deportations were 392,862. That is 1,066 a day. All that is privatized. The planes that you saw are privatized. The jails that the people that get picked up for having a bad broken taillight are privatized. This is big business. Some people are making money out of this. But what's more important is that out of these almost 400 deportees, half of them were convicted criminals. Half of them did not have any problems with the law. However, and this is I'm reading, researchers who study federal statistics said they could not dig into the immigration figures to learn more about the deportees who were not criminals, because immigration authorities had blocked them for the first time from receiving detailed data. So there's still a lot of problems accessing real figures.
Any more questions?
I understand that there was a lot of children involved that were probably born in the United States. What is their legal status? Like that one lady said, her daughter, I believe it was born in the United States. So technically, those children should have American citizenship and rights, correct?
Yes, those children have American citizenship, American passports, but they have no rights. They live in their poverty. There's 14 kids in this town called Calderas in Guatemala who have no access to any of the rights that we as citizens are entitled.
And that kind of leads me into the next question. The United States Congress is talking about taking away or not granting American citizenship to those children. What are your views on that?
I think that we have gone mad. I think that trying to change the Constitution, one of the most important achievements of the Constitution was to grant citizenship to former slaves. And this is exactly where we want to go back, some of us. And I think that is absurd.
I saw a hand around here. Okay.
Luis, how did you end up in this country, and what is your educational background and how you came to produce film?
Laura Rowan, Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General of Iowa, a real hero too. She's the subject of the next film. I came here to study engineering with a full scholarship to the University of Michigan. Let's go blue. But after I finished my degree after 3 years, at that time Guatemala was in the beginning of what became extremely horrible political conditions. So I had 1 year of my scholarship, and I said, if I go back, I'll probably get killed very quickly, so I better not do that. I then began doing something that I had always loved, which was studying literature. After my scholarship was over, I was able to pay for the rest of my education, and then along literature, I discovered theater and film, and the rest is history. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Hi. I'm just curious about when you were, all these shots about like people in the airplane and people getting detained and stuff. Is that like actual, like what happened, or is that a recreation?
I wish I had the money to do those recreations. Those are real shots.
So,
yes.
So you were allowed to be in the...
I was allowed to go on a media flight, as it's called. There was a reporter from the Kansas City Journal, a photographer, and myself that flew from Texas to Guatemala on an ice flight.
Thanks.
It was a sanitized ice flight. There's a lot of people who tell stories of being chained inside the plane, and their chains, their leg shackles are removed only a few minutes before they land. In this plane, nobody had shackles, and everybody had a new T-shirt, and as the Kansas City Journal journalist remarked to the ICE person who was our host, he said, all these women are ready for their close-up because they all had fresh makeup. And the reaction was, we had nothing to do with that. We had nothing to do with that, which I'm sure was true.
Yeah, I was curious. I'm from Guatemala, and I was in Guatemala when this happened, and I remember the news and all, but maybe you can tell the rest what the government of Guatemala, what was the reaction of Guatemalans or the government? Because I guess a lot of people were indignated, but most of people were like also. I know people in Guatemala City, at least, have like very short view also, and so people could say, "Oh no, like every day, thousands of people are coming back to the city, so they're creating a problem for Guatemala City now." And I know this sounds horrible, but that's what people think, you know. So maybe you can also say something about what the government reaction was to this.
Well, the consular office, the consul actually went to the National Cattle Congress, and he declared and it's published in the press, that there was no problem with the facilities at the National Cattle Congress. Some of the workers have testified that they complained to him that they were cold, that they were hungry, that they were thirsty, and the answer was, well, you're guilty, so just bear with it, and soon you'll be home. Amazingly enough, people knew about the raid probably faster in the home communities than anywhere else because of cell phones. It's amazing. Cell phone is an incredible development tool. People come to work here because their cousin, their brother calls them and say, hey, they're hiring, so they come. And they also say, hey, don't come, they're not hiring. So it is a really, that's why immigration is very, very flexible. If there's a lot of jobs, more people will come. If there's no jobs, few will come. I'm glad you mentioned the very narrow-mindedness of some of the people in Guatemala, mainly in the cities. And I think that is something that they share with us here. We have images of immigrants that we learn from the media, and unfortunately those images are very negative. I hate to talk bad about my home country, my birth country, but there's a lot of insensitivity to the suffering of others. And those same people that say these deportees are coming to create problems for us don't ever stop to think that those people, before they were deportees, were sending dollars to the country, and they were, sustaining the economy. So there's a lot to teach, a lot to for people to learn. And one of the purposes of doing this is to create new narratives that counteract what we hear in the media every day, and we begin to see the immigrants not as others but as ourselves, not as the enemy but as our neighbor. Not somebody who is coming to steal our Social Security, but somebody who's working, paying into the Social Security fund, and paying for our retirement.
Do you think if America was doing really well today, do you think the illegal, immigration, ICE and all that, do you think that would be as thorough as it is today?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that again?
If America was better off, do you think ICE and all the deportation that's going on, do you think it would be as thorough as it is today?
I am still not clear on the question.
If the economy will be better in America, do you think that ICE will be needed, and this kind of deportations? If we were doing good economically, I think her question is does this program still exist? Is that?
As intense, will people even care about it if America was doing good today?
If we were doing better economically, would ICE still be needed?
Well, yeah, and with the issue of immigration and deportation be as thorough and as harsh as it is today.
I think that probably not. It wouldn't be as harsh. I think that the issue of deportation, the issue of immigrants, it's a smokescreen. It is to find somebody who's guilty for everything that's going wrong in this country, the illegals. So I think that we do have a problem with criminal people coming into this country, and we have problems with criminals inside the country who were born here. But I think that a lot of the emphasis on illegal immigration is simply to take away our attention from who the true culprits are. Yes, please, Jeff.
Yes.
The problem, I shouldn't need this.
You sure?
No, yeah.
Okay.
Next. What she's referring to is a very clear image of what happened in Postville. It compresses it right down to the very tiniest parts. It's all about having people to do the work that we won't do. Time and time again, we hear people say, these people come to this country, they take our jobs. Did you see a single white person arrested at that plant? No. Not a one. They don't want those jobs. We need this slave labor. As long as we continue to rely on cheap food, we have to buy cheap food. As long as we rely on that, as long as we have to have that, we will have the immigration problem. The government will have to make it look like they're doing something all the time. So, miss, I don't think it will make a difference. Because they will have to always show they're doing something to keep the rednecks happy. And I'm sorry if there's any rednecks here. And Luis, just a splendid job here. I mean, having been at the heart of all of it, this one's made me angry all over again.
Good. I think that's what we need. We cannot stop being angry. But, Jeff was one of the first people I met. And Violeta was one of the first people I met. And one of the reasons I'm here is because of them. Because I saw what they were doing. They came to bat for these people. They came to bat against this injustice. And they didn't left. And the reason we had a trial for child labor violations is the work of Laura Ron. And even though the verdict was not guilty of knowingly and willingly having kids at the plant itself pled guilty to having kids at the plant. That's how convoluted law is. But the law in Iowa changed. Today, instead of fines of $100 for child labor violations, correct me if I'm wrong, it's $10,000 per violation. And today, you don't need to prove willingness and knowing. You can simply prove neglect. In other words, today, the verdict would have been guilty.
You said that it was the legal part of America that was the problem. So, and since most of the elites, which is a very few number of Americans, are the ones that put these people into the executive branch and the judicial and stuff, do you think that if more middle class and working class Americans would be more involved in politics, that something like this would change?
Well, I would hope so, and I really think that we do need to get involved. Think globally, but act locally. Really be involved. This is not going to go away unless the young people of this country begin to think differently. Yes, Laura.
Luis, what do you think of former Councilman Mr. Goldsmith's rationalization that, look, when you come as an immigrant, you start at the lowest rung of the available labor pool, and my grandfather did it, and that's why my dad was a PhD, and I reap the benefits. How do you feel about that explanation?
I think it's a little, well, I think there's some truth about it, but I think that it's also a little cynical, and I think it's also rationalizing slavery, and that's not what this country is about. No.
We did.
committee meeting.
Dear fill in the blank, we are very concerned with the issues that you have raised with this office. Thank you for your concern, and please rest assured that we are working and doing everything possible to rectify the matter immediately. Yeah, we get those, what, once every month or so? That's, that was part of my question to the young people here today. I mean, I grew up in the 60s. I'm a protesting fool. Where's your outrage? Where's your anger? The questions about the mechanics of the film and everything else have been great, but where is your anger? This is your government doing this to you. You have to grow up in this. Thank God I'm going to be dead in 30 years. I don't have to see what's coming. But you people, I feel sorry for you. You have got to get active. You have got to get loud, and you have got to put your heart into this. I haven't heard a single impassioned question from a student. Well, okay. My wife, she takes care of me real well. Please understand, you have to get involved. And that's where it starts with our young people.
Yes, sir.
I wanted to thank you for the very, very honest and very emotionally stirring film. And I also wanted to ask, my father paid for his college education working in a packing plant in Dubuque when it was a unionized job, and men paid for their children to go to school, and it built that community. And after he left the packing plant, it was crushed by the IBP system, which was the beginning of massive amounts of exploited immigrant labor moving into the community. And my father, having experience with that system, still says that the only reason, or the largest reason why they targeted agri-processors, was that the people who owned the packing plant were considered others in the community. They were Jewish, they were people who stood out, and it was easier to target them. What is the most effective way to target the people who are profiting the most off of a system that is providing a good that is as difficult for some parts of the community to refuse as cheap food?
That's a very difficult question. But yes, I mean, why was agri-processors targeted? There's been a lot of possible explanations. One of them is that they were an independent plant. Besides, I mean, there were reasons there were investigations going on for child labor violations, there were investigations for worker exploitation, there were investigations for wage questions, but I don't know how it is in the big plants, but the big plants have a lot of pull. So I think maybe I can throw this back to Laura. What do you think is the answer to this question?
Yeah, I think maybe the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of Iowa may be the only entity that actually knows why they targeted agri-processors. I do think if you want to continue to get informed and outraged, as Jeff mentioned, that you would look at who's giving the money to whom, and they will feather both sides of the aisle when it comes to feathering nests. Certainly the Rabashkin family has contributed a lot politically to both sides of the aisle, but if you look at Tyson and IBP, and if you haven't seen Food Inc., rent that, and you will see that that there's not a lot of motivation for candidates and politicians to talk about this because, as we know, they're funded a lot by big business. And at the time after the raid, it was also Iowa caucus season, if you recall that, and neither of the candidates on either side of the aisle, when they would come as close as Decorah or Dubuque, would speak of the raid that had happened just months before.
We have time for just one more question.
Over time, when sort of the masses have been oppressed and there's an elite that's sort of raping the community, you've always seen people gather together like a union. How come, because the core of all this is clearly cheap food, how come there has not been a union of consumers come together to say, we'd like to boycott this kind of food, we'd like to boycott this kind of behavior. Have you ever seen anything like this come together? Is there some sort of stirring like this?
The only thing that comes to mind as far as the consumers getting involved is the great boycott in California. But maybe Jeff can tell us something about the consumer reaction. Trader.
That's it exactly. There's so much cheap product out there. It takes guts to buy your food at the co-op, and it takes a lot of resolve. Mary and I, 30-40% of our meals come right from our own land. The rest of the money we try to spend at the co-op. We try to buy, labor-friendly food. If it's not locally produced, we try to make sure that it's all very green and very good. But that takes guts. You have to spend your money on that kind of food. You have to stop going to Walmart. You have to stop going to Trader Joe's. And people don't want to do that.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're just too comfortable, and it's counterproductive. Is
There are ways to do it. There are ways to do it. You learn how to make tortillas. I'm serious.
I was going to say, with agri-processors, do you remember the article in the film that came out in the Jewish Forward?
Yeah.
Nathaniel Popper, arch enemy number one of the Rabashkin family, right?
After he had that article about the labor practices and the modern day description, similar to Upton Sinclair's, there was a boycott by Trader Joe's customers on agri-processors' kosher products. And as a result, they were packaged and sold in Trader Joe's under names like Aaron's Best, for example. Abraham Aaron Rabashkin being the elderly Rabashkin, who still is a butcher in New York. Just ask him.
Yeah, and I want to add that there have been...
And that led to a big economic demise of the plant. They were spiraling after they lost the Trader Joe's account, so it did have an impact. Sorry, Luis.
Yes, and also that, as we show a little bit with the Reformed Jews in Minneapolis and Chicago, there has been an ongoing effort to bring ethical behavior towards workers in the certification of kosher food. But again, it's a matter of dollars. As Nathaniel Popper said to me, people are willing to pay a premium for kosher, food, but they're not willing, at least he said, I don't see it now, willing to pay a premium for kosher food that includes ethical treatment of workers. So I really think that, as Jeff said, we have to think about our daily actions. And it's not easy. It's not easy.
Well, just one more question, and it's 8:30 already. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Just in response to what Jeff said, I do agree with you in that the youth and the students should be more involved and need to get involved. And I think there are some of us that do have that mindset. So I hope that that we are out here, and that some of us are still trying to figure out how we can create change and how we can be part of the movement. And a lot of us are further in our education for that, no? So I just, kind of wanted to put that out there for those of us who are here in hopes of creating change and stopping these injustices. And then I also, in response to one of the students in the back, you can't tell us to not go to Walmart. We're students. That I think that in itself, what she said, is important to take into account, because there are so many. I was gonna say not to bring in our social justice class or anything, but maybe I do want to bring it in. There are interlocking systems of oppression that's right that allow for this to happen, that keep. Okay, hold on. What I'm trying to say is that there are interlocking systems of oppression that perpetuate this, right? One of those is Walmart. There's a reason for why Walmart is cheaper, right? There's a reason for that. That's what attracts us to go there. There's a reason for why we don't see that many co-ops. There's a reason for why sometimes students deviate from focusing their lives on creating change on these types of issues, and they're more focused on MTV or Real World or the Jersey Shores. I think it's true, and I think there are a lot of systems that are in place for that to happen. Like, that's not accidental. So while I do agree with the student that said, like, we're students, we can't stop going to Walmart, I could see why that rationale is there, and trust me, I feel you. But I would like to challenge all the youth in here and all the students in here to take a step back. That's something that I learned today in class, taking a step back and looking at why these issues are taking place. Like, why are things happening, right? Why is Walmart cheap? Taking a step back. What is Walmart? What is it doing to our people? And taking this another step back and figuring out why is this business still in place? So anyway, I just wanted to put it out there. And again, give it up for those of us that are here trying to create change.
Thank you very much for coming. If you want to be informed about the film, fill out your name and email on our sign-up sheet. And I just wanted to really say how much I appreciate you being here, your questions, and keep fighting. I was a commercial director, and one day I said, I have a little bit of my soul left, and I'm not going to sell that part. So don't give up, keep fighting, and do what you think is right.
Thanks so much for being part of the Latino Heritage Month celebrations. For those of you who came here for a class, the sign-up sheets are on the table over there. And there are so many people that I want to thank for making this happen. Sandra Rosado, Audrey Pinto, Aurelio Curvelo, Brian Castro, Pat Miller from Lectures. To bring someone for the Latino community to the Latino community takes a lot of time, takes a lot of money. And so if you want to be involved and want to be part of the Latino community and just make us more noticeable, I think that we need to stick together and we need to help each other, because seriously, sometimes it's just like 5 or 6 students working for this. And I think we deserve better, and I think that we deserve to be noticed, and I think we deserve to have good speakers. And one more thing, I know that you want to leave, but you're young, you're not married, you have the time of the world to start to make things happen. So use it. Thank you so much for being here.
Luz is back. And I also want you to, I want to recognize Adam Burke, who is my Iowa co-producer and who has made life a lot simpler for me now. And here's Luz Hernandez, who you saw in the film. Digo, eso dije, eso dije, eso dije, eso dije, eso dije, eso dije.